Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
This is my first time posting on Reddit. I've read stories here before, but never made an account or posted anything. I was reminiscing with a few friends and I suddenly remembered this. I told them about it and they recommended that I post it on here, as the community would love my story. It's a bit of a long read, but I assure you, it's worth it. I'm a 39 years old Caucasian male, and this occurred when I just graduated from college, so when I was about 22. At the time, I was about 6'2" and a decent build. I always was one of the popular kids at school and was never having problems with any sort of bullying. It all started after I graduated, very suddenly. First, it was all my college friends disconnecting with me. First ignoring me a little here and there to full out avoiding me. Then came the harassment. I'd started a job at a local convenience store which wasn't very busy, so it was a perfect place to come and harass me. When I say they, I'm referring to a group of guys, all about 1 to 2 years younger than me and still in college. They were way more muscular than I was, and some even cleared 6'4", so you can imagine them being pretty intimidating to me. At the start, they came in and did minor things that, at most, just inconvenienced me, such as taking something, bringing it to the counter, then telling me they had changed their minds and didn't want to buy it, then coming back with something else and doing the exact same thing over and over again until my manager came and kicked them out of the store. Then it became more serious. They started waiting for me outside in the parking lot after my shift ended and started getting physical with me. I tried my best to ignore them, but it was incredibly annoying. It wasn't extreme, just like a punch on the shoulder, a flick on the ear, the usual bully stuff. This continued for weeks and I was afraid to take any action as I was afraid that it would just get worse. I was very non-confrontational at the time. Eventually, they decided they'd gotten bored of messing with me and decided to take it to the next level by physically harming me. They'd shove me to the ground and kick me, smash me against my car, and mess with my stuff, and once they nearly even broke my arm. I was done with these guys, but still too fearful of them to take action, so I let it continue. And that was a big mistake. Apparently, I wasn't enough for them, so they started targeting my family. I don't know how, but they got my brother and mother's phone number and started calling and harassing them using one of those apps which allows you to have a random, anonymous phone number and being all-around jerks. This infuriated me a lot, but I kept my cool thinking that they would just get bored of me and move on. They didn't. My brother, who was at the same college I graduated from, was about 4 years younger than me, so about 18 at the time. He was exactly like me. Non-confrontational and shy, which made these jerks think that they could have a piece of him to get to me. One day, my mother got a phone call telling her that my brother was in the ER as he had a broken collarbone, broken arm, and a fractured hip. He had told them that he slipped and fell down the stairs. I knew from the start that this was nonsense. He wasn't allowed to walk for a full month, as doctors said it could cause a fracture to extend and worsen the situation. So here my brother was, stuck in a wheelchair for about a month because he slipped and fell down the stairs. I went and confronted him about this, and after I applied some pressure, he broke. He started crying uncontrollably and told me it was the same dudes who have been harassing me for the past months. Furthermore, my mother went into mild depression because of the whole ordeal. Everyone has their limits, and they have just crossed mine. This is a point where hell unleashes. I, through some friends, got the number of one of the dude's girlfriends, who, by the way, was completely oblivious to the fact that her boyfriend was a sadistic bully. And after explaining the situation to her, got her in on my plan. I got her to give me his address as this was crucial to my revenge. My family members were devastated at the news of my brother, and after explaining the whole ordeal to my 2 older cousins, who were both Taekwondo black belts, they were also in on my plan. I was going to annihilate him physically and emotionally. 2 days before the college finals week, I went to his house and rang the doorbell. He saw me and instantly started grinning. I told him I wanted to fight, and he started laughing hard. He told me I should go home and try not to embarrass myself, but I was persistent. He followed me outside and we went to a nearby abandoned school, which was about a minute away from his house. The whole time he was taunting me about how I was going to suffer and how great he was. We reached the field and my two cousins came out in their taekwondo gear looking intimidating as hell. His attitude and facial expression completely changed. He started complaining about how it wasn't fair and that it was 3 against 1. I told him that the fact that he had assaulted my brother and caused him to not be able to walk was not fair, and told him that he was going to regret that decision. Before he could respond, one of my cousins came running up from behind him and did some sort of move, kicking him brutally in the head. He fell to the ground and his head started bleeding. I could hear him whimpering on the ground, but I was merciless. I signaled to my other cousin to have at him, and he did. It was beautiful. Every kick to the stomach, every punch to the head, his bleeding body lying in the ground, watching him suffer after what he put me and my family through. Eventually, we stopped attacking him after we realized he was unconscious. I started to get a little worried. I called his girlfriend and she called and she came and put him in her car with the help of my cousins and took him to the hospital. I don't know all the details of his injuries, but he was hospitalized for a month and a half. He ended up missing finals week, having his girlfriend break up with him, and having his entire family condemn his actions after I informed them of what he had done. He was also left with a permanently disfigured face. He had to have plastic surgery for all his facial injuries, and the surgery botched the job, and now his face is permanently disfigured. I didn't get away with it completely though. His family pressed charges and I was arrested for assault. I was jailed for 6 months with some pretty hefty fines, but it was definitely worth it. The other bullies stayed away from me and my brother ever since then, and we have gotten on with our lives. I feel like the satisfaction of vengeance was worth the 6 months in jail. It did. At the start, I say I have one brother, and when we attacked the guy at the field, I referred to my male cousin as my brother. I fixed the error in the story, but this is just to inform that when I said my other brother, I meant my cousin. I work as a soccer referee in Australia for junior games, and I have worked as a soccer referee for several years. I'm 16, but I'm small and look younger. A few weeks ago, I was allotted to referee a soccer game for under 12. I arrived 40 minutes before the game was about to start. I was preparing with my 2 assistant referees. Normally, for under 12 games, there are no official assistant referees, but I lucked out. Around 15 minutes before the start of the game, we got out to check the uniforms and equipment of all the players, which is very standard practice and is required to be completed before the start of each game, and the coaches of the teams are well aware of this. The home team was fine, we spoke to the players, and within 30 seconds we were walking over to the away team. We walked up to the coach, standing in his line of sight. When he had all the players huddled around him, I waited for him to finish speaking to them so we could check their uniforms. He finished talking and sent the kids out to warm up before we could get a word in, which was mildly annoying as the whole process would take a bit longer. Coach, could you call the kids in so we can have a word? Thanks. I asked the coach. We are trained to not give in an inch of ground when dealing with parents, players, or coaches. So that is why I may sound a little rude. The coaches know the referees have full authority, but sometimes they need to be reminded. Can't you just wait a few minutes? I want the kids to finish their warm-up. No, we are going to speak to the kids now. Once we make a decision, we must stick with it, even if it doesn't happen on the field. Just wait 5 minutes or so to talk to the girls. It won't take long. My first assistant started to speak, but I cut him off. We talk to the players when I say we talk to the players. And I say we talk to the players now. It's just a few minutes, referee. It's not that important, just wait. Right, we are going to come out in 12 minutes to talk to the players. I motioned for my assistants to follow, and we walked back into the referee's room. 12 minutes was the amount of time that the game was scheduled to start. As a referee, I had the authority to shorten each half of the match in junior games. But in this league, it was strongly discouraged by the coaches and parents. As for a child to sign up to this specific league, it cost around $2,000 Australian. 12 minutes later, we walked back out onto the field with the captains already waiting at the center of the field. This is unusual. The coach yelled out for me to start the match across the field, as we were a few minutes late. I slowly made my way over to him. Call the players so we can speak to them. Also, because we are starting this game late, the halves will be cut to make up for the lost time. I told him, "You can't do that in this league, don't you know? Just start the game, referee." I can do that in this league and we have specific instructions from the leaders of our branch. Not important that we were allowed to cut halves but try to avoid doing so. I tell him, I can and I will do that. So I suggest you call your players in before you lose any more time. I told him again, "That's nonsense. I am going to report you to the football committee." Coaches are not allowed to swear. Doing so is the immediate reason for expulsion from the game. And he had also openly disagreed with my decision. By this point, a small crowd had formed with parents and officials from both teams alike. In this league, we were also allowed to give cards to coaches, and they work the same way as on a pitch. I showed the coach a red card, meaning he had to leave the premises of the grounds and the club had to pay a $500 fine. As I was walking away from him, he yelled out that he didn't mean it and that we can talk to the players now. I went to my marshal and told him to escort the coach away from the game, which he did. In the end, I didn't bother cutting the halves of the game as no one but the coach and my assistants had heard that I would cut the halves. The time lost was about 20 minutes and there was a 30-minute break between the end of this game and my next one. The game started and finished without a hitch. I was 10 years old when Karen attacked me with a crutch and threw my bike into the river. It was a hot summer day, my friends and I were just trying to have a good time. We were riding our bikes around the neighborhood, laughing and chasing each other when Karen came out of her house like a bat out of hell. Karen was an entitled woman who lived in a big house right on a river. She was always complaining about the noise we made when we played outside, and I guess she just snapped that day. She came at me with what seemed like her poor husband's crutch, yelling and swinging it around. I tried to battle away, but she was too fast. She grabbed my bike and yanked it out from under me, sending me crashing to the ground. "What do you think you're doing?" I yelled, rubbing my scraped elbow. "I'm sick of you kids making all that racket," Karen spat back. "That's the last time you're going to see that damn bike of yours." That was that she hoisted my bike up over her shoulder and started walking towards the river. My friends and I were in shock, and we just stood there staring as Karen waded out into the water and tossed my bike into the river. I was so angry I couldn't even speak. My bike was my pride and joy, and Karen had just ruined it. I stormed back to my house and told my dad, the local sheriff, what had happened. He was livid, and he immediately called the cavalry and brought the whole station to her doorstep. My father, the sheriff, stormed up to Karen's house, his face red with anger, and banged on her door. She answered a few moments later with a smug look on her face. "What do you want?" Karen asked, crossing her arms over her chest. "I want to know what the hell were you thinking? Attacking my son and ruining his bike," the sheriff yelled. "He's just a kid and you had no right to do what you did." "I was sick of that racket they were making," Karen replied, rolling her eyes. "They were driving me crazy with all their noise." "That's no excuse. You could have told me and I would have taken care of it. You have no right to attack someone, especially not a child. You're coming with me to the police station." Karen's smug expression disappeared, replaced by a look of panic. "You can't be serious. I'm not going anywhere with you." "Oh, I'm serious," my dad said, grabbing Karen's arm and leading her towards his squad car. "You're going to pay for what you did, Karen. You can count on it." Karen was arrested and charged with assault and vandalism. I never saw her again, but I heard that she spent a few months in jail. I guess she learned her lesson about messing with a sheriff's kid. It's been 10 years since that incident and I still remember it like it was yesterday. I still have scars on my elbow from what I scraped it on a pavement, and I still think about that poor bike that was thrown into the river. Karen may have been an entitled woman, but she made a huge mistake that day. Okay, so about a year ago, I left a job working as a waitress at a salad buffet place that shall remain nameless. I have been working there for about 2 years. More on my departure later. When I started working there, I was warned by a friend of mine who had gotten me the job to watch out for the night shift manager. Let's call her Nancy. Nancy was a massive jerk. Not only was she grating, just in her personality, but she had the worst temper and would go off on anyone for minor infractions or just not doing things her way, which more often than not was the exact wrong way to be doing these things. I occasionally worked as a cook on the hot bar, making hot food items for the buffet as well. In the first 2 months of me working there, Nancy told me no less than 10 times, probably more, to make a sheet cake for the bar. Was informed by me that I had never been trained on how to make sheet cake, and instead of showing me so, I would know for the future she would just scream for the customers to hear, "You are so useless, move, I'll make it myself." So yes, Nancy was a total witch, and quickly developed a hatred for me because I'm not the kind of person who keeps my mouth shut when I'm being unjustly berated. At least 3 times the owner of the place, let's call her Dolores, she'll be important later, had to reprimand Nancy because I told her how Nancy had been treating me. And each time she got reprimanded, her ire for me grew and she would, after a short period of acting like a decent person until the heat died down, start laying into me even harder. Of course, this wasn't even the worst of it. I've worked with jerk managers before. I know how to handle myself. What really tipped the scales for me was her supplemental income practices. You see, Nancy wasn't just a witch, she was a greedy witch. She had worked as a waitress before she became manager, as I understand, and apparently missed the tips. Because she would keep a hawk eye out for regular customers who tipped well and would insist that she serve them no matter whose section they were in. That was majorly against company policy. As was the fact that when she didn't have any of these high-dollar parties to sponge off of under the table, she went over the table instead, right to the tips left for other servers. I cannot tell you how many times I watched the party put down $5 on a table, walked away to put dishes down, and then walked back to find Nancy bussing my table. Just trying to be helpful, she would say, and be informed, "Sorry, she looks like they stiffed you. Better luck on the next table." God, she wasn't even subtle about it. Every table she bussed for me would up stiffing me. And of course Nancy would flaunt into work each day bragging about how she just got her hair done at the salon or got her nails done. It makes me sick. But I digress. You see, I wasn't sitting idle all this time. I had, as I mentioned, told Dolores about her harassment of me, but I also informed her about the theft of tips and taking tables she wasn't allowed to take. Dolores, let's get this straight right now, had no business on this green earth owning or trying to run a company. As I understand it, it had been a dream of hers to run a restaurant, and her entirely too loaded for his own good hubby had paid for the entire thing just so she could. She clearly grew up as a rich witch and was used to things just going her way. Because a decent manager she was not, but more on her later. The reason I bring up her ineptitude is because when I told her about Nancy's unacceptable and illegal behavior, Dolores would just shrug and say, "Yeah, a lot of the servers tell me that, but I can't really do anything without proof. I'm trying to find someone to replace her as night manager, but until I find someone, we're just stuck with her." Eventually though, Nancy did get the sack. I don't recall exactly what she was fired for, it's not important. What is important is when Dolores called me into her office one day. "Hey she, so Nancy is trying to file for unemployment benefits. Could you write a statement of the things you saw her doing around here so I can show that to unemployment and I don't have to pay her?" It was abjectly, I had a statement detailing some 13 infractions, many illegal, that I had witnessed Nancy engaging in, printed out and ready to hand over to Dolores the next morning. As I hear it, not only were her benefits denied, but she was also being questioned by the police. Score. But Dolores doesn't get off scot-free either. As I said, she had no business running a company. She was a horrid little monster. Rich and entitled, neither by her own earning, she strutted around like the queen of the place. I remember once she was asked about Christmas bonuses, and she said, "Oh, I'm sorry, we just don't have the money to give anyone a bonus this year." The next day, she went on a vacation to Cancun or somewhere like that and came back after doing some expensive cosmetic surgeries. No money. Yeah, right. I was entirely sick of Dolores for reasons that I won't enumerate, seeing as I seem to have a novelet forming already. I do try to keep these short. They just keep getting away from me. I was ready to quit and find a new job. However, my landlord informed me that he was selling the house I was renting a room in, and I had to find a new place to stay. So these things aligned made me start thinking. My girlfriend and I, who lived out of state, were always planning on moving in together. She had an empty bedroom. I had money to rent a car. I needed out of my job. We pulled the trigger. I booked a car for 2 weeks out, typed up my resignation, and gave Dolores my 2 weeks notice, which is a far sight more professionalism than she deserved from me after the nonsense she had put me through. So my last 2 weeks at this job, Dolores saw fit to try and punish me for daring to leave her employer. She was having staffing issues at the time because she was developing a reputation as a bad boss, so very few new applicants were coming in. Those who already worked there were jumping ship because Dolores was a nightmare, and they could already feel the ship was starting to capsize. So for my last 2 weeks, Dolores would happily schedule me as the only server on mini shifts. I would have the entire floor of roughly 60 tables I would have to tend to. Luckily, it was a buffet, so catering to a table was quick and easy, and I'm a great server, so I could handle the workload. Joke's on her. I made more in those last 2 weeks than I usually made in 2 months working that job. She also decided not to schedule me for any days off in that time, though the lengths of the shifts made overtime very improbable. But no matter, like I said, I'm a great waitress, partially because I don't just do serving, I have my fingers in a little bit of everything, trying to make sure the entire place runs smoothly, not just the parts I'm responsible for. Teamwork makes the dream work. The thing about that is I don't think Dolores ever realized just how much I did for her on a daily basis. At least I hope she wouldn't be stupid enough to treat someone who was keeping her livelihood afloat the way she treated me. But who knows? The point is, as I was looking over my schedule, I noticed that Dolores has me scheduled on a day I'm supposed to leave, the day that falls outside my 2 weeks notice. Guess not being able to count to 14 was one of the things contributing to her poor management. And lo and behold, she scheduled me to work solo that night. I am 5 hours outside the town border when my shift starts. Right on cue, my phone starts ringing off the hook. I let it go to voicemail the first 3 times and picked up the 4th. Hello? She, where the hell are you? Your shift started 15 minutes ago. I need you here right now. Oh, did you schedule me today? I thought I told you 2 weeks ago I was quitting. That's tomorrow, not today. Panic creeping into her voice. Nope. Count it up. I handed you my 2 weeks notice on date X, and yesterday was day 14. Oh, okay, I messed up. I just need you to come in tonight. I have nobody else who can cover. Sorry, Dolores, I am already in another state. It would take 5 hours to drive back and my shift will be over by then. You'll have to call someone else to come in. I already tried when you didn't answer your phone. None of them want to come in. I figured I wasn't the only one who wanted as little to do with Dolores as possible. Well, I guess you'll have to figure something out. You're the manager. I'm sure you'll manage. And with that, I hung up, turned off my ringer, and had an absolutely blissful drive out of my old life. Comfortable in the knowledge that Dolores was full-on 5-alarm, hair on fire panicking in my wake. So this story is pretty simple, and it happened at my work. We are an assembly line type food place, like a Subway. We get a lot of customers coming down the line some evenings. For some backstory, of course, as we serve food during COVID times, we have been drilled about our cleanliness. We change our gloves as often as we possibly can and wash our hands in between glove changes. We actually are still getting the lectures for it and likely will continue to. It was an evening night and an older couple came in. I watched them arrive through the doors, so I was standing and waiting to greet them immediately. But my cheery, "Hi, how are you guys?" was ignored. That's fine though, happens all the time, so I then begin to take their orders. The lady looks at me and the first and only thing out of her mouth was loudly, shouldn't you change your gloves? Now, it doesn't translate to text well, but the amount of force and attitude literally had me taken aback for a second. It was a bit humiliating to basically be accused of being unsanitary even when I had just changed my gloves. Also in front of my manager and other co-workers. But of course, the customer is always right, so I turned around to go wash my hands and change gloves while flushed tomato red. I was angry at her rudeness though, so I decided to do her a favor and follow our full protocol. I used plenty of soap, scrubbed for 20 seconds, rinsed under hot water, and used paper towels just to turn off the sink. It was an entire ordeal. She had front row seats with a nasty look on her face. Unfortunately for her, during the minute I spent washing my hands and putting on gloves, two separate co-workers came to help and finished making her food. I'm sure their gloves were clean, but she didn't know that and she looked livid. Looks at me, looks at the co-workers, looks at her food, all was pure rage, while I'm trying to hold in the laughter and glee of the rude woman getting screwed over. She didn't even bother mentioning it to the other employees, and then I had the glory of ringing her up and taking her money. I was sure I was going to get a Karen rage fit, but I guess she got knocked down a few pegs, because by the time she got to the register, she just seemed really embarrassed. I understood her outlook, but there is no really reason to speak to food service employees like we're the scum of the earth. Also, maybe just ask if we have fresh gloves instead of assuming we're all gross. Edit. Gonna throw it out there that she paid with a card. I didn't actually physically touch her cash, and I never even got to handle her food. Let me start off with a backstory. I come from a long line of firefighters, and so, when a few fire trucks from the fire company, which the men in my immediate family used to volunteer at, came up for sale, my grandfather bought them and fixed them up. However, my grandpa had a townhouse and only had just enough room to park them in his backyard, but not enough land to build a building and store them. When my dad bought his property with a few acres, it was decided that a barn would be built to store the fire trucks on my dad's property. This property didn't have a house and used to be designated as farmland. Now we get into the story. When my dad wanted to build a house in this little bit of woods right off of a new neighborhood, on land he bought, he had to get the government to rezone it to be residential. This isn't that difficult, just holding a court session to make sure nobody has any legitimate objections to the procedure. However, for some reason, one more neighbor was just too much for a decent chunk of the existing neighborhood, so a bunch of them came up with every dumb reason as to why that land had to be left alone. The woman, who will feature prominently later in the story and we will call Mrs. B from now on, suggested that the land would be much better suited for horses to frolic in. Nobody in the neighborhood knew of anybody in the town who owned horses, and there wasn't enough land for horses to legally be allowed to live upon it. So after about 2 weeks of this and similar nonsense, the court rezoned the land and finally, construction of the house began. As soon as the trees were cut down, the fire trucks were moved onto the property where the barn would be built once the house was done. Once all the trees were down, my dad built up a barn pile to dispose of all the wood. And before he did, as well as him being a firefighter himself, called the fire department to let them know what he was doing. And they said it's alright because he was right in the window of land where no permit would be needed, and a big bonfire also wasn't a problem. So he lit it up. Soon Mrs. B comes strutting, phone in hand, yelling at my dad that she's calling the fire department. He tells her he's with the fire department and in case she's blind, there is 2 fire trucks already on the property just in case. They were antiques, but they'd still get the job done and were ready to. She continues screaming, so Dad gets on the phone and calls the fire department once again, asking if anyone has called to complain about a fire at his property, to which they respond saying no fires have been reported that day at all yet. So Dad hangs up and starts calling Mrs. B the liar that she is, to go back to her house and quit disturbing us. We have a few more interactions like this over the process of us moving in, but nothing deters us, and so finally a barn is built for the trucks. Eventually things die down in regards to the neighbors, and we make good friends with about half the neighborhood. Now, a year or so after the barn is built, another local fire department my grandpa is involved with is working on selling one of their old trucks, a giant Ford Louisville model, basically a semi-truck with a fire truck body. They don't have space to store since its replacement has come in, and until they find a buyer, they need a place to store it. So my grandpa offers to store it in our barn. Part of this deal involves us running the truck around once a week because letting the truck sit too long could cause damage. Well, during this time, Mrs. B starts having a ton of yard sales. We noticed a few people parking on our lawn during this. Not like one tire on the grass or something, no. There are people using our yard like it's a parking lot. We always try to ask people to move because it's our lawn after all, but yet it keeps happening. One day, we learn why Mrs. B keeps telling people to park on our lawn. We figure a good solution to this is to put up a sign that's been spray painted to say no parking in big black letters, clearly legible so everyone knows. Our lawn stops being used as a parking lot for a bit. Until one day, Mrs. B decided to march on over, rip the sign off its post, rip the post out of the ground. It was all temporary, so it was just temporarily duct taped together and pushed into the ground a little, and proceed to throw into what's left of the woods behind our house. My parents were furious, and people began parking in the lawn the way they used to, again, the next day. This is when my dad comes up with a genius plan. He puts the sign back up, but he's not done. It's just that time to take the Ford around the neighborhood. My dad has been driving trucks like this since he's had his license, so he knows just how to get it to do what he wants it to. He takes it out, goes up to one end of the neighborhood, turns around and starts heading back. This truck had a 10-speed manual transmission, and in this half-mile-long stretch of road he got the diesel motor into 8th, waited until just before he reached Mrs. B's house, and by the time he had reached the edge of her property the truck was in 3rd. Now this truck was diesel-powered, and all that slowing down makes the truck roll some serious coal, with the exhaust pointed straight at the yard sale on a relatively calm day. Needless to say, while nothing looked all that bad, maybe a little darker than before, the worst part was the smell. Diesel fuel stinks really bad when it's been coal-rolled. Within a few days, everything left from the yard sale was packed up into garbage bags that was sitting next to her trash can. She might have tried to call the police, but would the cops even acknowledge her if she told them that her neighbor's fire truck drove by spewing black smoke all over her yard sale items, ruining them? I don't think so. After this, not only did she leave us alone, she stopped having yard sales altogether. So point being, since Mrs. B was horrible to us that whole time we've owned property in the neighborhood, we cost her hundreds, if not thousands of dollars she could have made at that yard sale, and any others she might have